TaxAct knows filing your small business taxes can be a nightmare, like the kind where you're being chased by a giant W-2 form and you're running and running, but you can never reach the submit button. Or something like that. So, TaxAct offers Expert Assist with live tax experts to make filing taxes less scary. Now, you can just have pleasant dreams about being chased by other giant, non-threatening paperwork. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
And the confrontation in Pittsburgh with the mill workers. I was just in stitches about how that plot line ended, because I just thought it was so funny that he ends up being this capitalist with a heart of gold who's no, don't shoot them. It's okay. It's not right. Send the Pinkertons home. We'll work it out some other time.
Hi, welcome to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. I just wanted to let you all know before you listen to today's episode that there are sponsor ads in this episode. Shout out to the sponsors of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. They include the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine, Broadview Press, and That Old Gay Classic Cinema podcast. But if you don't want to hear ads in the episode, you know where to go. Our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. You can listen to all episodes ad-free, and you can watch the video version of the episode, which, it's always exciting to see what it's like when I'm posing a question and the guest is giving a really riveting response and seeing their facial expressions. And mine too, where I probably have my hand on my chin and I'm just looking at at their body language when they're delivering such exciting information. Okay, so remember, please follow us on YouTube. Make sure if you're listening on Spotify or Apple that you not only follow us, but please rate and review. It really, really means a lot. Again, I'm going to plug the YouTube because I'm trying to grow our YouTube presence. Please subscribe to YouTube. Please like our videos. Again, this means the world. Follow us on Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Same on TikTok. You're going to see a lot of fun clips on TikTok. I also feature lessons that I'm teaching my students, which usually involves the subjects that you can find here on the podcast. And we have our virtual book club. It's free. It's on Zoom, so it's really easy to join. It's happening on April 27th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are discussing The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Yes, Mel Robbins, the empowerment self-help guru who you probably have seen on TikTok or Instagram if you scroll all the time. So I hope you join us. If you want to join the book club, just email me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com, subject heading book club, and I will get you the Zoom link. Okay, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. When I was with this guest, it's a repeat guest. I wasn't officially Dr. Andrew. So, things have shifted a little, but our fascination and love of the Gilded Age has not shifted at all. So Dr. Sheila Liming. Hi, Sheila. Welcome back to the ITBR.
Hi, Dr. Andrew.
Oh, thank you. I feel flattered when you say it. So Sheila is the author of a new book. In 2023, she came out with Hanging Out, The Radical Power of Killing Time, which I love. On X and Instagram, you're just hanging out with your book in different photos, which is just very clever. I like the marketing campaign. In 2022, she edited actually the Norton edition of The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which is going to be a popular author in our conversation today. In 2020, she wrote Office, all about office culture, right? By Bloomsbury. Mm-hmm. Is it about office culture, Sheila?
It is, yeah. And
Oh,
office history and office design and all kinds of things.
yeah. So, where we're sitting right now, she has uh given a philosophical account of the office space. And then in 2020, what like I first got drawn to Sheila's work from What a Library Means to a Woman, Edith Wharton and the Will to Collect Books, where you had done so much research at the Mount, right? When you did that book?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I spent 5 summers total working at the Mount, which is the Edith Wharton estate located in Lenox, Massachusetts.
Yeah, such a beautiful place. So I'm so glad you're here to be a sounding board with your Edith Wharton Gilded Age scholarly expertise and hat as we've ended the Gilded Age season 2. And I said to Sheila, okay, I'm going to rewatch it and we're going to start where you usually don't in chronology, especially in Gilded Age novels. You never really start at the end and go backwards because that wasn't a conceit yet. Um, like that's a very Virginia Woolf thing to do. But
Mhm.
I love the recap in our finale episode because I feel like it really gives us every plot point and every major drama that was happening. And then they try to resolve each of those in the finale. And like, I'll ask you if they're successful or not in doing that. And maybe one plot point is more successful, maybe the other is a little sloppy in how it wraps up. But I'll just go through each plot point with you if that works, Sheila.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so in the first storyline arcs that we get of the recap is we have the opera war between Mrs. Astor and Mrs. Russell, which I think is it safe to say that's the most heightened soap opera element of season 2 is the opera wars.
I think so too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's weigh in on the opera wars. Like, is this something that you found very Edith Whartonian? Like, did you think that this spoke to reality? Like, what's happening here between Mrs. Astor and Mrs. Russell?
Yeah, the show has a funny relationship with history, right? At points, it is actually representing history and showing it to us. Like, this skirmish between the Academy of Music in New York and the Metropolitan Opera did really happen. And it's, showing us some of the characters who are actually involved in that skirmish, including the Astors. The Russells are made up, of course, but they are sort of like fictional counterparts to what we might think of as the Morgans or something like that, the kind of new money cohort in New York. And yeah, the kind of like scandal over the opera, which concludes in the final episode when we see that the Metropolitan Opera has really taken off, and the Academy of Music is basically already like dead and buried as an institution, is really dramatized, I think, for like our sake in this season. It started last season, but it really comes to fruition this season. And of course, that's all very, very Edith Wharton, right? The Age of Innocence opens with a scene at the Metropolitan Opera, which is newly minted at that point. And the characters are watching a production of Faust, which is what they're watching in the final episode of The Gilded Age. And it stars Christina Nilsson, who is the person who was mentioned earlier on in the season, is singing the soprano role in the opera. So it's all like it's taken right out of the Age of Innocence. Just kind of supporting my idea that the Gilded Age is basically Wharton fan fiction.
I love that theory because like that's something I find interesting with Julian Fellows, right? Our creator, director, did Downton Abbey. And I feel like, right, this is a very I was looking at the cast and I had no idea before our recording, Sheila, how many of this cast is actually British or Australian.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is a lot of them play the servants. And I don't know if there's like a correlation to that, but well, some of them are British, like actual
Mm-hmm.
characters, but some of them have an American adopted I don't know, New York Gilded Age accent because of their social class. But I do
Right.
feel like because it is so American, the series, you really can't play around, or they're not playing around with dialect distinguishing the social classes, unless you think I'm wrong.
No, I don't think so. We don't really get a strong sense of like a New York accent on anyone except for the young servant who's also like the experimental clockmaker. We
Yes,
get it
yes.
on him, but he's one of the only people, right? And in some ways that does make some historical sense when you think about people who might have been recent immigrants from European countries who had been actually trying to shed their accents in some way and pick up a slightly different dialect for the sake of maybe disguising the circumstances of their birth. You can see how that would happen. But he's like the only character where I've really noticed it much.
Yeah, they all have transatlantic
Yeah,
accents in a way,
right.
right? So okay, so we have the opera wars. This new money, Bertha Russell, George Russell, and then the old money, right? The Van Ryns, the Astors, um, the Brooks. I guess a question for me is Agnes and Ada, right? Agnes is a Van Ryn because her husband was a Van Ryn, right? And Ada
Mhm.
has the maiden name, Brooke.
Mhm.
But like, were the Brooks as wealthy as the Van Ryns? Because I still don't really understand who holds the power, right? Because that's another
Yeah,
recap narrative is that the Van Ryn money has been lost by Oscar. Um,
yeah.
so like without the her husband's money, would Agnes and Ada still be living by Central Park in a well-off environment?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? And it's one that, families during the Gilded Age had to contend with, which is why we see so many Edith Wharton plots that are built upon the tension that comes from like, what do we do with the unmarried female daughter of this family? And like, how does she get taken care of? If the money is supposed to channel towards male lineage, right, then that becomes a kind of like dangerous zone for women to be in, especially if they don't end up getting married, like Ada doesn't until, of course, up until this season, very recently, and unfortunately, tragically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not, sure how like Julian Fellows or how the show is conceiving of the Brooke money, whether or not it's old or new or how much of it is around. But it does seem pretty clear that, there can't be that much of it around if the loss of the Van Ryn fortune is so devastating for them. And then they have all those like briefly lived conversations about like moving downtown and like to like the ethnic districts and, not being able to have their servants and stuff.
Well, and that's so funny, like how moving downtown is scandalous because
Mhm.
the Wharton, well, not Wharton, but Edith Wharton's family, right? Wharton is her married name, but
Right.
like after the Wharton School of Business at
Mhm.
UPenn. Um, but she was living in Chelsea downtown in the like lovely townhomes. So, which now is a Starbucks, I'm sure you know. But it's like very close to someone I collaborate with. It's a women and queer art gallery called Pen and Brush, like right by
Mhm.
the Flatiron. So anytime I'm there, I'm like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can feel Edith Wharton. But like something that's so interesting though is why was that so scandalous? Because downtown, unless she's referring to like the Lower East Side, but that maybe that's a critique I have of this show, Sheila, is there's not
Yeah.
a lot of specificity.
Yeah. I agree. I think every now and then we actually see the director's like unfamiliarity with American geography, American social politics, and like American social customs. And I think especially in New York City, Edith Wharton was born, in what we would think of as the lower numbers of Manhattan, down there near Union Square, and that's where she lived when she was growing up. And when she was growing up in the 1860s and 70s, well, first of all, she wasn't growing up there. She was mostly growing up in France because her parents whisked her off to France after she was born. But those numbers were seen as being fashionable at the time, and it was an unfashionable thing to move too far north. But that started to change as the new money contingent started to come in and make more money. And people like the Morgans needed to find more real estate and bigger plots of land where they could build their giant mansions. And so they started to kind of push things further north. So it's interesting that the Van Ryns would think of moving as downtown as being a bad thing, like a slip in their social status, because really they probably shouldn't. That would be more in keeping with their class status as old money.
Yeah, well, and then there's that new money, like the historic reality of a family that I really wish the series, well, it's I think it's after, I'll give the series credit. The Khans, Otto Herman Khan is a little after the series is taking place, but like the Jewish new money, like Otto
Mm-hmm.
Herman Khan, that's now Sacred Heart was their
Mm.
mansion, but then they built their mansion on Long Island too. And that's something
Mm-hmm.
that the series we never get. We get Newport, but we never get Long Island mansions. We never get New
Yeah.
Jersey. Like I find, I guess, except Marion Brooke was in Doylestown in Pennsylvania at the beginning of the
Yeah.
series. Um, but why do we never? maybe it's the shooting locations, I'm sure, because I know it's at a
Hmm.
soundstage on Long Island, and then it's like
Hmm.
upstate Troy in New York.
Yeah,
But
Troy, exactly. Yeah.
right. So, but that is a little frustrating. I feel like you said, I wish we would get the downtown. I wish we would get
Hmm.
sites in New York City. And
Yeah.
I guess it's just the limiting filming that they can do in New York City,
Yeah.
maybe to make it look historical. Um,
Maybe I think that might be part of it. And maybe once again too, the showrunners and directors and producers might be to a certain extent overlooking New York City's relationship with Long Island. Yeah, because Wharton had family who had houses on Long Island during that same period too. She ended up naming her house the Mount after her grandfather's house that was located on Long Island, where she used to spend a lot of time in the summer and things like that. That was certainly a part of Gilded Age like lifestyle, right? In addition to houses in Newport and in other places too, Long Island was definitely a part of that scene. So it's interesting that the show doesn't get into that. I wonder if maybe they were trying to constrain their geography for the sake of not making it appear too confusing. But
mm.
for us, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, was her family? I have a feeling Edith Wharton's Long Island family was in Roslyn, or
Mm.
I'm assuming like Nassau County, North Shore, just
Hmm.
because that's where the Nassau County Art Museum was a Gilded Age mansion.
Right, right,
And
yeah,
just because in the House of Mirth, there's that reference to Roslyn Harbor. Um,
right.
so not that Edith, an author, has to always pull from reality, but I think,
Right.
Edith Wharton does a great job. See, that's the thing is I feel Edith Wharton, I keep wanting her novel to be like the series to breathe life into her novels.
Yeah.
And instead I feel like you said, it's the soap opera fan fiction, which isn't a problem, but it isn't the House of Mirth in the new age.
Yeah.
It's a little, it's different. So, okay, we had the opera wars, we had the Van Ryn money, something that now I think takes us more into historic reality, which the series doesn't do a lot, in my opinion, is actually Black education and fighting for
Hmm.
equal rights and the reality of schooling, and that the North
Yeah.
is not as progressive as it might seem.
Yeah.
So, like,
One
what
of
do
the
you
plot
think
points
of
I do love
that?
in the show is like the black press, and that was actually like used pretty well, I thought, this season. Um, it might seem a little opportunistic to send Miss Scott down to Tuskegee for an episode or two, but I do like the way that it like introduces drama and also shows us the importance of the black press. And then towards the end of the season, that becomes the black education system as well, right? With the schools being threatened with losing their funding and being shut down.
Mhm. Yeah, and her as like an expose journalist.
Yeah.
I have to say, I love Danae Benton, who plays Peggy. I
Yes.
think Audra McDonald as her mom, that whole like unit,
Hmm.
um, their storyline really works in the series. Um, but I also like, do you think that they've done a good job in this series integrating racial diversity? Or does it feel like do you feel like these are two separate, which they are separate communities in historic reality,
Right.
except for Peggy working for the Van Ryns?
Yeah.
Um, but do you think that they're doing a good job integrating like racial issues, or do you still feel that they're not really telling the historic reality?
I think they're struggling to integrate some of those racial issues, but I appreciate the effort. You know what I mean? Like, I think there have been some like awkward moments in the writing and in the plot lines to make those issues become part of the other dramas that we're interested in,
Mm.
such as the fact that Miss Scott quits her job in the first season and then comes back to her job working for the Van Ryns in this season, which feels a little silly. That she leaves effectively because she doesn't like how she's being treated by some of the other people in the house, and then ends up like coming back to it. So I thought that point of conflict was treated a little superficially. And it seemed like a kind of like opportunistic move on their part to get her back into the main part of the narrative, as though her story wasn't also interesting, as though we couldn't find ways to appreciate that story, even if it's like existing alongside the other plots about the Van Ryns and everybody else.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. Do you think that, like, let's go into Marion Brooke, because I have to say I love her storyline about education, like how her and Peggy to me seem very aligned in the sense that not only are they good friends, but Marion is um fighting gender stereotypes of like being a female educator. And then we get her whole failed engagement. So, okay, what did you think of just where Marion Brooke went in season 2?
Marion's an interesting character and also has some amazing costumes. But what
Yeah.
I like about her is that she, I think, kind of embodies the spirit of reform that we saw during the Gilded Age that was often coming from, some old money sources. And it's interesting how her aunts, how Christine Baranski looks down on her activities. But at the same time, too, there is this kind of like, it's called public spirit of charity that we see among the more moneyed families. And she's like, taking that a bit further, which is what causes a bit of controversy. But I like her character because we see through her, something that I think was a really important thread of life during that time period, which is like the reform movement and this effort to create charitable options for the poor that was spearheaded by people like her, these kind of like do-gooders that were like attached to some of the old money.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said, Sheila, about like this reforming aspect. So like the historic reality for everyone out there, and just because I don't know a lot about the reforms during the Gilded Age, um, is it uncommon or is it common that the old money like want to appear as progressive, or was there a lot of conservatism, or was that more of like a new money type of attitude to be more prejudiced? Like basically was old money or new money, like which families were
Yeah.
more conservative, prejudiced, or like egotistical?
Well, I think philanthropy was certainly a big thing in general, right? And there was certainly a desire to appear philanthropic on the part of both new money and old. I think where that breaks down between new money and old money is in terms of the things that were being supported, the institutions, the causes, etc. And, one of the things we saw in the first season is that there is this kind of like general spirit of philanthropy among the people in this elite circle that we're watching most of the time in the Gilded Age. But there's also a great desire to not get your hands dirty. So you're going to like support some sort of philanthropic endeavor. You're going to host a charity ball or something like that. Or like, what was the like craft fair that they had in the first season? But you
Oh,
don't actually
yes,
want to
yes.
interact with poor people, right? You're trying to stay away from poor people. So what Marion does wrong is that she crosses the line. She's not just there to support through philanthropic endeavors, and of course, she doesn't really have much money herself anyway. But she's actually spending time with poor people, and that's the thing you weren't supposed to do.
Yeah, like she's too chummy or
Yeah,
too close for comfort, like in Agnes's opinion, that
right.
like it's great if you did a lecture or two, but like for you to actually want to be employed as a teacher, like
Yeah,
it's kind of like Edith Wharton. Why would you want to be employed as a female writer? Like you don't need
right.
to
Yeah,
do that.
right.
Um, even though that's their well, and that's the whole issue with this failed engagement is Marion has made a
Mhm.
choice. Like my agency and my independence is more important than just doing a marriage of convenience.
Mhm. Right.
Um, so that did seem very realistic in my opinion of
Yeah.
where she's coming from.
Mhm.
Um, do you think though that her family's response would have been a normal response or they would have pushed her into the marriage?
Oh yeah, for sure. Don't you think so? Especially when they were having like their financial issues and stuff. And, cousin Dashiell already agreed to pay for the wedding and everything, like, supplanting the family's role that the bride's family is supposed to do it. So they had like kind of hooked up this pretty sweetheart deal to get Marion off their hands. And then at the last minute, she, well, not just changed her mind, but she actually like made public that her feelings were different and were not going to work. So yeah, I'm not sure that the family would have been so understanding, under those conditions. But it's nice that we are able to see the understanding side of them through her aunt Ada.
Yeah. I've always seen Marion Brooke. I always thought she was a Lily Bart type of character
Mhm.
from the House of Mirth, but in season 2, it kind of cemented that she's definitely almost an anti-Lily Bart. Like she is
Yeah,
not going to be rushing to find a husband at the last minute.
right.
Like
Because
she's going to
Lily Bart
find her
is
job.
like forced into working in the reform houses because she loses all her money, but she doesn't want to. She's not
Mm-mm.
necessarily there like for the benefit of the poor or anything. She's doing it because she needs the income.
Yeah, well, it isn't like the whole drama or her attitude. It's just if you had to distill it, like talking about hanging out, I feel like she's the epitome of hanging out. Lily's like, I'm gonna go on the cruise. Like, I'm going to go to the casino. I'm gonna relax and gossip. Like she
Right,
never has that ambition. It's like, yeah, like you said, how can I just find money so
right.
I can enjoy leisure time?
Yeah,
And I don't
exactly.
really think Marion actually enjoys leisure time.
I don't think she does either. She seems to experience very little of it actually in the context of the show. She's usually like busy. She's doing things.
Yeah, which I appreciate.
Have you ever wondered, wait, how does Andrew know about all of the new LGBTQ literature, TV, and film in society? Well, I have a secret tool and it's called the Gay and Lesbian Review. It is my favorite magazine. It is bi-monthly, which means it comes out every 2 months. So right now, the March and April issue just came out. It's an encore issue. It's called When Did the LGBT Movement Begin? There's such exciting articles about what made Stonewall different, a sacred order for sexual outsiders, the house that Hirschfeld built, and so much more in that issue. I actually just had on authors William Benjamin, Margaret Vandenberg, and Lawrence Senelik, who had written to me, and I discuss his responses as a special gay and lesbian review and ITBR podcast episode. So you can look for that in our podcast catalog. It is all about the January and February issue called Strange Fruit. So I can't wait for you all to listen to that. I absolutely love all of the queer history, culture, politics that the Gay and Lesbian Review covers. I love getting my print magazine. It just is so nostalgic having a magazine arrive at my door. But they also have an extensive online edition, so you can get the magazine online. Um, I know so many in my life who've told me that they are now reading the Gay and Lesbian Review for LGBTQ literature recommendations. I love that. So you can use an exclusive code. Stephen from the Gay and Lesbian Review and Richard gave me an exclusive code to share with you all. It is called ITBR Choice. So ITBR Choice. Go to subscribe on the glreview.org, put in that code ITBR Choice, and you will get a free issue with your subscription. So all you'll have to do is where it says what magazine do you want for free, just put March and April or January and February. And I can't wait for you all to get your hands on the Gay and Lesbian Review. Make sure you follow them on Instagram. And please let me know if you're reading the Gay and Lesbian Review because I'd love to shout you out on the podcast.
So you all know that I am such a fan of musical theater and classic movies. So I can't wait for you all to listen to one of my good friends' podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, hosted by Christian Garcia. It's a podcast that looks at classic cinema films that we know and love. And he was inspired by Turner Classic Movies and The Great Movie Ride. Remember that amazing ride where the Wicked Witch of the West rose up in a burst of flame in Disney? That was one of my favorite rides. I'm so sad it closed. So while looking at classic films, Christian is so excited to look at it with a queer lens. And he brings on friends like myself to talk about all of these films. I was on the first episode when we discussed The Sound of Music. I've been on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. He just released an episode about the Philadelphia story. He's done Meet Me in St. Louis, Sweet Charity, Psycho, Mary Poppins, Hello Dolly. He had on Down the Yellow Brick Road hosts and the Garland Gab hosts to talk about The Wizard of Oz. So make sure that you listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify and follow him on TikTok and Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Okay, start watching the classic movies and make sure you listen to Christian's podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
Empower. Claire is practicing her breathing for her upcoming yoga retreat in Bali. Has she ever done yoga before? No. But Claire worked with Empower on her savings and investment strategy. She got good at money, so she can be a little bad. Empower. Invest well, live a little. Join our 19 million customers today at empower.com.
Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risk. You may lose money. Advisory services are provided for a fee by Empower Advisor Group, LLC, EAG, a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Om Namaste.
Then we have, like, you already brought it up, but something that I'm still kind of wrestling with is I do think a major distinction between Edith Wharton's novels and the Gilded Age is the issue of religiosity, because we don't really, well, we did get an introduction to religion, I have to say, through Ada Brooks' narrative and you know, getting married. So, like, what did you think of the way that religion was brought in with the Catholic Church?
Yeah. That's interesting. And I think the show sort of treats religion among these upper classes that we're watching as similar to the way that it treats the subject of philanthropy, that it's something that everybody's supposed to be sort of tied to, but not that much, right? Not that close. So I imagine that all of the characters who we see in the Gilded Age who are representing these elite families would profess to being religious in one way or another, to being members of a church. But that's not the same thing as saying that they like are deeply invested in their religion. And that's something that Aunt Agnes ends up making fun of Ada for, right? In her like chasing after the pastor and marrying him and stuff like that. That she's like all of a sudden getting more into religion than has been like, you know, what she's seen from her in the past.
Yeah. Wait, and I forget, is he a Catholic?
I think he's Episcopalian.
Oh, he's Episcopalian. Okay.
Yeah.
But they're were they Protestant or Episcopalian?
Would have depended on your family and your ethnic background a little bit. So yeah, in their case, it might depend on where they came from and which side of the family they were being loyal to. With a last name like Brooke, you know, could mean that we're talking about descendants from somewhere in like the British Isles, and that would make Episcopalianism more likely.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like my mom's side are Protestant and their last name is Totten, so very British.
Yes,
but yeah, Van Ryn is Dutch,
right?
So Episcopalian seems more,
yeah,
right? Or they could even be Quaker, but right, because aren't the Quakers Dutch?
Yeah, but then the church service would look a lot different. Nobody would be speaking.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the reason I say Quaker is because I know they were very, and still are, progressive. Like they were very at the front of abolitionism and women's rights.
Right. Yeah, it's
like,
true.
Same-sex marriage in recent time. But yeah, I bring up religion because I think I'm still surprised that there is no, like Jewish character. Like there's no like, oh, new money. Like I thought that was going to be a season 2 surprise. It's like, oh, George Russell is Jewish. Like there's this like hiding identity happening.
Right. Yeah. You're right. We have not seen any representation of Jewish characters, which is something that is actually pretty consistent in Wharton's oeuvre, right? We see a lot of Jewish characters represented, sometimes not always in the most complimentary lights. But it's clear that she was like aware of the differences in religion and thinking about them sometimes in the way that she was building, you know, her novels and her fictional characters. Yeah, interesting that we don't have that so far in the Gilded Age.
Yeah, well, and I wonder if that's because Edith Wharton was also like reading Emma Lazarus and like like you said, new Jewish families who were in that area where she was living, like who came from like Emma Lazarus came from a Sephardic merchant family, and like Emma Lazarus lived in a brownstone, so like had means as well. And like you said, Edith Wharton is not always doing justice to understanding Judaism, but she's at least trying to represent. And
Yeah.
I always just wonder, is Julian Fellows nervous to address, but he does address racism. Is he nervous
Yeah.
though to address other aspects of oppression?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we've seen that with the plot line involving George Russell this season, and the like confrontation in Pittsburgh with the mill workers. I was like just in stitches about how that plot line ended, because I just thought it was so funny that like he ends up being like this capitalist with a heart of gold who's like, no, don't shoot them. It's okay. It's not right. Send the Pinkertons home. We'll work it out some other time.
Yeah, I was like, I don't think that's how it would have gone down.
I was like, most likely, yeah.
Like most likely there would have been violence. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, he is supposed to be, he's kind of like our endearing, good doer. He's like the good doer
Right.
husband. And I don't buy, sometimes I feel like they bring scandal to the surface, but sometimes we need the scandal to like climax. Like we actually
Yeah.
need someone to step in it
Right. Yeah, I
and
know.
have
I agree. And
consequences.
yeah, exactly. And I know that, part of what the show is struggling with is that some of the main characters that they have presented as the most likely candidates for our sympathies, including the Russells, are like historically not people we would have liked very much, right? If we were getting into the life and times of, JP Morgan and family, we probably would have some real criticisms of them. So they are strangely now tasked, the show creators, with like putting these kind of villainous historical figures in sympathetic positions, so that we can all be like, oh yeah, I do want them to succeed. I do want them to get their opera off the ground.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. It's, congratulations to the actors. Season 3 has been
Right.
approved. I love all the actors too. I love that they rely on
I
Broadway
love
talent.
especially Morgan Spector, but yes, I like all of them.
Well, yeah, I love. Did you see that like post with his tattoos and everything?
Yes.
Well, and the reason, not just because Morgan Spector's father side is Jewish, but like I found out that his like paternal grandmom was like this huge presence in the Yiddish theater. So I guess like
Oh,
just knowing his
interesting.
background, I'm like, oh, maybe
Yeah.
he's like they're gonna make George Russell interfaith, or like he's gonna
Yeah.
discover ancestry. I mean, if they're listening now, that could be season 3. It's like they don't have 23andMe, but like maybe there's something uncovered on
Right.
Ellis Island. So if we see Ellis Island and George Russell, I'll be like, oh, I know what's happening.
Yep.
But even like Bertha, right? We still don't know. We really don't know where any of these people come from. Like we know that where their family names come from, but I still am surprised. Why don't we ever get flashbacks? Like we don't get anything about their upbringing.
Yeah. And yet other people's backgrounds are so important, like the former maidservant to Bertha Russell Turner, who in this season becomes the like, money grubbing, wife of the elderly gentleman. And her background matters a lot. That becomes a point of scandal where, Bertha's thinking about basically exposing her so that she can get what she wants, right? But meanwhile, I know there was some offhand comment in the first season where Bertha mentions like, being like the daughter of Irish immigrants and like having to had to work her way up the system. But other than that, we don't know anything about where she comes from. Yeah. And we don't get to see that background, which might actually help to humanize the characters a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, because I agree. You can tell Bertha is definitely compensating for not having that upbringing of pedigree and being a dilettante. Like that's not her world. Which is like a very new money reality, right? A lot of them did not have the family name. They're,
And hence why, it seems like she might have made a deal with the devil in setting up Gladys to marry the Duke, right? So that she could get what she wanted from him, which is basically just his allegiance with the opera. A very silly thing to sell your daughter for, but it seems like she is heading in that direction.
Yeah. So like out of season 2, which of the characters or like storylines did you think worked the best? Like, who were you really, where was your eye drawn to?
I really liked Ada's arc during this season.
Hmm.
I thought it was actually shockingly charming. There are parts of the show that sometimes feel like they are going for sentiment for me, and then they don't quite arrive all the way, and it ends up feeling just a little bit forced or wooden. But I think her storyline, with like the love of her life that has come along very late in life, and then making big decisions about like leaving her sister, seeing her sister's pain as she does that, even though she has to like cover it with cruelty and meanness and all that kind of thing. I thought that was kind of interesting. And I did enjoy that storyline very much. And, I have to say, even though I don't always love the show, I did learn something this season from the debacle about the Brooklyn Bridge. I didn't know that the Brooklyn Bridge was at least largely designed and that the project was carried off by a woman. So
See, I thought that was like one of the most important historical
yeah,
contributions.
I thought
Yeah.
so too. And I was like just walking over the Brooklyn Bridge 2 weeks ago, and I was looking at the
Mhm.
plaque that, credits her husband for his design and engineering of the bridge. And then I was thinking about like, oh, I learned something from the Gilded Age.
Yeah, yeah. No, the Roebling family, being from New Jersey, my mom grew up next to Roebling, which is like where the foundry, and it's like such, the Roebling family is such an important
Mm,
touchstone in that town. But it's like near the Trenton Bridge, and
mm,
like, so they, but knowing about yeah, her contributions, I agree. I think that was, I'm so glad they touched upon that. And I kind of wanted her to be
mm.
embedded more
Yeah, me too. Right.
in the series.
Yeah.
Like, could she have linked up to Marianne Brooks somehow? Like, do some
Yeah.
architecture lessons at the school? I don't know. It's
Hmm.
but that's the thing also. I love Laura Benanti, the actress who I'm trying to figure out. I forget
Hmm.
what her character's name was, but she was the one in Newport whose
Hmm.
husband was passed
Right.
away. And she's like, I
I liked her
guess,
character too.
yeah, because she was like very innocent, but at the same time a seductress, and you didn't really know what
Yeah.
her ambition was, and why is she like really trying to woo the Russell
Yeah.
boy. Like, I
That
thought that,
conflict was great, and I thought it was removed far too quickly or resolved far too quickly. That like Bertha kind of just comes bustling in and shuts the whole
yeah.
thing down. But yeah, I thought that character was interesting, not just for the transgenerational love affair, but also the idea that this woman who had clearly been pressed into marriage, a society marriage, and an arranged marriage at a very young age for the sake of capturing a fortune, was basically now just coming out into like public, right? Like getting to experience life for the first time and having this kind of like sexual awakening, Edna Pontellier style, that was going on there. And I liked that.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of coming out because, right, there's like coming out as a debutante, but like the
Hmm.
queerness of coming out, like maybe that's why the queer community is so like invested in the Gilded Age series. Because I was going to talk to you about who do you think the audience is here with this series. Um, but I do think that there's that repression, and then like her opening up, that you actually see her sexuality, and that there's passion, and there's
Hmm.
like making out, and they're probably having sex, and it's like, oh, they did have
Hmm.
sex in the Gilded Age, old, like in the wealthy families. Because that's something
Right.
the series, I just, and maybe that's because of Julian Fellowes' involvement with Downton Abbey, which really didn't have a lot
Hmm.
of sex. But where is the eroticism?
Yeah.
That was like the only storyline where there's actually anything displayed, and it's on Max, so it's not like
And I know
they,
exactly. Like, Downton Abbey was on BBC, right? So it was like being shown to different kinds of audiences. I can understand why it downplayed the sexuality and the eroticism. But yeah, for a series that is on HBO Max, although I don't know whatever its contract happens to be in the UK and where it's being shown there. But yeah, you would think that we would get a fair more amount of eroticism. And I also think that there's interesting stuff to be done there with eroticism during this time period because it's something that nobody talks about, but it's also very clearly something that structures so much of public life.
yeah. Well, and something that I had done when I did an Edith Wharton presentation was, and I'm sure you know, like her unpublished erotic
Hmm.
story, which is like,
Yeah, her incest story. Yeah.
yes,
Yikes.
but like, yeah. So, even Edith Wharton herself, I mean, right? Can you tell everyone about like her bisexual, like, right, friends? And I just know that she was
Yeah.
in a circle, especially in Paris, that was completely open with sexuality.
When I think about this sponsor for the podcast, I always just think of coziness. There is such a cozy aesthetic with Broadview Press. If you've never heard of Broadview Press, they are an independent publisher. They publish books like the new edition of The Wizard of Oz, The Great Gatsby, Dracula, all of your classic literary canon. But they don't just publish classic books, they also publish anthologies. So I just had the pleasure of meeting the editors of the Vampire Literature Anthology. If you are a Gothic fan, if you love the history of vampires, Nosferatu, you are going to love this anthology. You don't have to be a college instructor or even a college student to enjoy Broadview Press's books. For example, the Vampire Literature book has so many different literary examples of just where the vampire pops up in our zeitgeist of pop culture. Another book that I absolutely love is The Philosophy of Sports. I'm sure so many of you out there listening know someone who's obsessed with sports. Did you know that there's a whole investigative philosophy about why people are drawn to sporting culture, why there are diehard fans? I'm looking at you, Philadelphia Eagles. I can say that because I'm from the Philly area originally. Anyone else not from the Philly area, we're going to give you a side eye. But Broadview Press just is so incredible with their books that they're always publishing. I love talking to Dylan, who works at Broadview Press, and Dylan always sends me copies of new books that have come out. So I know all about a new book called Everyday Ethics, which you definitely have to look into if you're interested in philosophy. But I also love that there's a collection of Victorian literature, American literature. If you have just been really interested in a genre, like you just love fairy tales, then you need to get their Folks and Fairy Tales anthology. So Broadview Press has been so kind to give a promotion code for all of you listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Ready? Write it down. Put it in your phone right now. It is ITBR20. So you get 20% off all of your Broadview Press books. Any book that you get is 20% off. BroadviewPress.com. Please let me know what you're getting from Broadview Press. I'd love to share it on our social media. And make sure you follow them on Instagram at Broadview Press. Enjoy your reading.
Clorox Sentiva smells like lavender. Cleans like Clorox. And feels like...
All right, that could go on for a while. Experience the long-lasting freshness of Clorox Sentiva, available in Clorox Sentiva Lavender Scented Bleach. Use as directed.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
I think sexuality was a very strange thing for Edith Wharton and very strange during her time period. She was extremely sheltered in the way that she was brought up. And as a result, she had, really intense female friendships at a young age that kind of lasted into her adult age, with people who she spoke about very, very affectionately in quasi-sexual terms sometimes, right? Where they had pet names for each other. And she often considered some of these women to be her sort of closest confidants and stuff like that. It didn't help that she ended up in a loveless marriage where sexuality was not present. In fact, we're not sure that she ever consummated her relationship with her husband, Teddy Wharton. It's not proven, so who knows? But we know that she did have, of course, later an extramarital affair that was a big point of sexual awakening for her, kind of like what we see in the Gilded Age, right? With that, being sort of put into a marriage of necessity at a young age and then finding passion later on at an older, more mature age. That's kind of what happened to Edith Wharton with Morton Fullerton too. But, you know, like you said, she was hanging out with people who were taking the idea of sexuality at much more liberal terms. And it's amazing. I'm not sure to what extent they were actually discussing this openly at the time, but it's amazing now to look back on her social circle, especially during her Paris years, and see how many of those people were pretty clearly queer, right? And some of them even were open about that in one way or another, if not necessarily to her.
Yeah, it's like that bohemian circle she's a part of. And like, and I'm trying to remember the name, but I know she has a poem that's like basically a metaphor of masturbation, right?
Yes, yes. Is it Terminus? Because I love Terminus.
I love Terminus. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, it's
so
amazing.
good.
Not only is it a metaphor for masturbation, but it's also like the train station, right? The trains coming in and then like getting to the end of the line, and like the images are really awesome. Yeah.
But like literature, that's something in the series, like talking with you, Sheila, because I took note when Agnes compares their situation to the House of Usher, the doomed House of Usher. Maybe that's just because I had recorded a Fall of the House of Usher episode and like my interest in Poe and 19th century American literature. But it was a moment where I thought, wait, they don't really talk about literature and other, like they only talk about the opera. Like you don't really hear about authors like Whitman. I'm surprised like no one has talked about like the scandalous Leaves of Grass, or like there's like moments where they really could bring in literature and they don't really, they're not even really even going to the library.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it's interesting. Wharton and her family, they were members of the New York Society Library, which was a private members only library that was located just on Central Park West, and still is to this day in the area. And it was also like a social scene, right? In addition to like going there to borrow books, it was also a way to be seen in the right crowd and to interact with the other type of old money New Yorkers and that kind of thing. So you could imagine in the way that the Metropolitan Opera plays a point of like producing conflict in the storyline in the Gilded Age, that something like that could too. It would also be a meeting space where they would be able to get out and see each other. But you're right. We've had curiously few mentions of literature of any kind so far.
Yeah, well, and I find it interesting that we also aren't getting any theater scene except the opera. Like we're not really getting like when it's a like we're not really getting allusions to other culture. Which is puzzling. I wonder too, like we're not even really knowing about the colleges in the area. Like I don't know why Columbia isn't really being talked about. Because I'm assuming that the majority, like we don't even really know which characters, like I'm assuming the male characters, because a lot of women, a few might have gone to college, but that was very, as you know, rare. But like, we don't really know where they got their education from.
Yeah, you're right. That's another component that's just kind of absent there.
Yeah. And do you think that, like, who is this series appealing to then? Like, we definitely have to talk, like, is this just appealing to the diehard Gilded Age, like, the two of us and those out there who are scholars or into arts and culture, or is this appealing to the public?
So, in the beginning, I was a little bit irritated because I had thought that I was among the audience for the Gilded Age. And I recently got burned in watching the Apple Plus adaptation of the Buccaneers in the same way, the Edith Wharton novel, thinking that I was surely going to be the audience for that adaptation too. And in both cases, I think that I'm not. Or that's not to say I don't enjoy it, but I don't think that I'm the primary audience, and probably you aren't either. I think the primary audience for shows like this and for the Gilded Age is like people who may be interested in historical fiction and in historical drama, and maybe people who are actually not that familiar with names like Edith Wharton or with anybody else who would have come out of that scene. I have a feeling that your enjoyment of the series is probably going to be much richer if you don't already know that it's borrowing a bunch of plot elements from these books you've already read,
Well, maybe that's why they're not referencing novels because
So
then
that's what I was thinking about too, is like trying to hide its literary illusions so that it makes itself look more original.
they're like, don't look here. Like,
Yeah.
don't look at the Morgan Library, which I know you've been to the Morgan Library, Sheila, but I love the
Love it.
feel. Like that to me is the Gilded Age. Like you can
Right.
feel the history. And that's kind of what I thought the Gilded Age series was going to like bring alive the secrets,
Yeah.
the taboo aspects. I mean, I went to the Vanderbilt mansion here on Long Island. And if you've never been there, Sheila, you like have to go because it is one of the most eccentric places. You can feel the ghosts dancing like around their graves because you're like, why is the bedroom of the couple in the middle of the house on display with all the windows? I'm like, these people were kinky. Like something's going on. That's kind of what I want. Like, I want these characters to be eccentric, and we're not really getting eccentricity. I'm getting,
I agree. Yeah.
yeah, like you said, they're all tasteful. Like, these are people that I could befriend. I mean, Agnes is a little bitter, but you know, it's not to the point where like I wouldn't want to talk to her. Yeah, I feel like there's like a playing it safe, and I'm not sure why they're playing it safe, like you said, with villainous characters. Like, who are they protecting?
It does feel a bit conservative in that way, that everybody's been kind of like polished to a shine. Their characters generally are like well-rounded in the sense that even when they do something bad, they come around and their arc shifts and then they do something good. So we do have this kind of sense at the end of the day that it all equals out, which makes it feel like we are not living in history and we're not looking at history in this show, we're looking at something else. But perhaps for the intended audience, you know, that works better too.
That's true. Well, I would say, have you been watching the Bridgerton series?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say Bridgerton is out of time. Like
Bridgerton is out of time. It's totally anachronistic. Yes.
Yeah, like which for that series with Shonda Rhimes, it's working because it allows for more diversity and like, you know, representation to happen and like recreating history, right, in a more progressive light. And I feel like the Gilded Age is kind of doing it, but at the same time, it does show like prejudice with the Scots narrative. So like it's not completely anachronistic.
Definitely not. Yeah. I actually think the Gilded Age is trying very hard to show us history. It's just not always working.
Yeah. Well, so as we wrap up, right, where do you hope season 3 goes? Like, do you think you can see already? I mean,
there was a bright season where I was like, okay, the narrative could really get more interesting in the next season if we build upon this crisis, which to me was the losing of the Van Ryn money. And I thought, you know, if we wipe out this status that the Van Ryn family has, if we basically take them back to zero, and if we force them to live like normal middle-class characters or something like that, we will then fill in this gap that we currently have in the narrative because we have no normal characters, right? We don't have any like average middle-class people walking around. We have upstairs and downstairs and nothing in between. And so I thought that could be really great. But unfortunately, they managed to resuscitate their fortune at the last minute by killing off a character and then getting his money to be like injected back into the Van Ryn bloodstream. So that unfortunately is not going to happen. So my hopes have been dashed. But I'm hoping that, you know, it's like you said, this last episode kind of resets the clock. It takes everything back to normal again, which means that effectively anything can happen next season, because we're kind of back to where we were when we started.
Well, it almost seems like Marianne Brooke is volunteering to be middle class. She's like, I'll be tribute. I'll be the middle class person. But you're right. Like, we don't get middle class characters, which is so American. And maybe that's because
it's like somehow Julian Fellows missed the fact that the most important part of the class hierarchy in America has been for a century the middle class.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, I thought those who are most invested now would be throwing tomatoes at the old and new money because of the tensions in our social class system right now. Is like we're kind of, people are saying we're resuscitating the Gilded Age, and it's getting so tense with the middle class feeling they're being squashed.
Yes, exactly.
So,
right.
and I feel like
that they are being
Yeah.
forced basically a step down, right? That they're being forced to return to something that resembles more like a working class identity, and that is also a much stable positioning within our class hierarchy. I agree. I think it's a very weird time to have given us a show where we are basically being asked to root for robber barons.
Yeah, I mean, but maybe season 3 will
I know. Well,
uproot
fortunately,
everything.
they're sexy water robber barons, so we have that going for us at first.
Yeah. Well, I will say that at the end, what do you think of Marion, falling for the Russell? I always call him the Russell boy, but
Yeah.
falling for the son.
Well, I mean, I imagine in setting up that conflict, one of the things that they're going to try to explore is, the stink that probably both of those families would make about that. The old money family wouldn't want to see Marion marry into new money. And the new money family, who has a lot more money than the Van Ryns, wouldn't want to see him, their heir, marry somebody who's effectively kind of poor, right? Like she has cachet and she has legacy, but she doesn't have actual money. So there's a conflict on both sides, which makes that relationship somewhat impossible. And I imagine that's where we are headed with some of the conflict in season 3.
Well, so if that is where the conflict goes, then I guess we might get more of that, like, middle class. Like, are they going to compromise by being with each other? Not that they would live in a middle class life, but that Agnes and Bertha are really going to go head to head, which they kind of have already gone head to head. But yeah, I agree with you. I feel like we kind of need a huge shift to happen in season 3. Something really needs to go down.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a death. Like, I agree.
Right.
I was so sad for Ada. I'm like,
I know, me too.
why did Cynthia Nixon have to face such tragedy?
She was literally married for one episode, which is part of what makes the show feel like a soap opera. Is that's the kind of like stuff that you see in a soap opera, right?
Well, unless the ghost of him comes back, which could also be a soap opera, and then he's an alien. Like, I mean, I don't know where they're going with this, but okay. So, will you be watching season 3?
Of course. Partially for the dresses and partially for Morgan Spector, but yeah, I'll be there.
I will too. I feel like there's a lot. I hope that there's exciting new characters, because I think they need another family or two. Like, even I hope that there's a middle class family who then like inherits money, or like you can see the transformation, and then I hope one of like the wealthy families goes on the downturn. Like, I think we need competing streams here.
Yeah, we have to see characters changing places, which happens all the time in Wharton fiction, right?
That's true. I mean, how about if Marion might take a lot of money and I don't know, do something with it, and maybe Bertha and George start to lose a lot of money. I don't know. I think that could be fascinating if the Russells just start to go topsy-turvy.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because I mean, the Astors really can't, because this is, well, I was going to say, is it true that the Astors are our only historic wealthy family in the series?
I believe so. The only one that's actually a character. Sometimes they drop names of other ones, like when they're talking about like people who will be in Newport or whatever. But yeah, generally, like, I don't know if you remember in the first episode that, like, Bertha Russell mentioned seeing the Joneses in Newport. So like every now and then we get these mentions of the other families, but they're not part of the character base that we have.
Yeah. And how was Edith Wharton even alive when the series is taking place?
Yeah, she was, but she wasn't in the United States. So she wouldn't have really been like bearing witness to any of what we're seeing there, which didn't stop her from writing about it later on. But
yeah, I mean, I would love if they go to Paris and Edith Wharton is there.
Yeah, right. That'd be nice.
I wish they filmed at the Mount, even though I know the Mount wasn't built yet. But I wish they did something like give us a little Edith Wharton love or something happening.
Yeah, give us some on location, authenticity.
Yes, feed our appetite. Oh my. Well, Sheila, this has been so wonderful. I feel like we like hit everything here.
I think so too.
I hope they got a lot of ideas. Hi, Julian Fellows. I mean, I don't know if he listens to podcasts or watches YouTube, but to the cast, we love you. We hope you all take our suggestions.
Especially Morgan Spector.
yes, Morgan Spector. Well, and I feel like Meryl Streep's daughter, Louisa, right, Jacobson, would be very invested in and Cynthia Nixon. I think Cynthia Nixon's like, okay, jotting down notes.
I can't stop calling Cynthia Nixon's character Aunt Miranda. That's what I want to call her all the time.
Yeah, well, it's
so
just...
like, Aunt Agnes and Miranda.
Well, I have to say, I think Carrie Coons, Christine Baranski, they're all just like so good at their personality. So, just give them a little more meat to their script, please. Like,
Agreed. Yeah.
They're not
Carrie
soap
Coon's
opera
amazing.
actors.
She's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they're ready to handle what you're going to give them without it being over the top sappy. Like that's, I love soap opera actors, but they're not soap opera actors. That's a different, I like Lisa Rinna, but they're not Lisa Rinna. So everyone out there, how can they follow you, Sheila, on X, Instagram, your social media?
Yes, you can find me on X, where I am at she speak. I hate having to say that out loud, but it's a fun tongue twister. And I've got the same handles going on Blue Sky and Mastodon as well, although I don't check them as often these days. They're kind of like, my backups, but I'm around.
Great. Yeah, I'm not even on Blue Sky, but I'm not going to add. Yeah, if I add another social media account, I think
it's a lot of work, let me tell you.
Yeah. I will probably be like Oscar Van Ryn and just go wild. Oh, let me just say, I hope Oscar Van Ryn something continues with his love affair, because that's like my only like queer male story or any queer character. So I like a little more there.
I like it too. Yeah.
yeah. I like his relationship. I mean, not what he does with the money, but he's our villain. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, there could be more villainous things happening. So thank you so much, Sheila. This has been great.
Thank you. This was fun.
Okay. Bye, everyone out there.